Hello and welcome to episode 44 of Refining Rhetoric. This is your host, Robert Bortons. I'm excited to have my friend Jeremy Tate. He founded the Classical Learning Test, which takes on the progressive or maybe regressive education system and pursues truth, beauty, and goodness. This is a titan in classical education right after David Goodwin, who's a dear friend as well. So you won't want to miss this podcast. Let's jump in.
Classical Conversation Studios presents Refining Rhetoric with CEO Robert Bortons, a podcast where faith, business, politics, and classical education meet. Join us as we use the classical tools of rhetoric to seek truth in every arena of life.
Hello and welcome back to another episode of Refining Rhetoric. Today my guest is Jeremy Tate. Jeremy is the founder and CEO of the Classical Learning Test, an educational company that provides assessments that are intellectually richer and more rigorous than traditional standardized tests and college entrance exams. Jeremy is also the host of Anchored, a podcast featuring discussions with thought leaders about education and culture. Be sure to check out my episode on it. And before founding the CLT, Jeremy served as Director of College Counseling at Mount DeSales Academy in Maryland. He holds a master's degree in religious studies from the Reformed Theological Seminary. Jeremy, welcome to the show.
Hey, Rob Ward, it's always a delight to chat with you, my friend. How are you?
I'm doing well. It's always fun to chat with you. I know we're going to have a great time, and our audience are going to learn a lot and have a good time. I always want to start with this question. What is truth? How do you define it?
Yeah, I think my simple definition would be language and actions that are in accord with reality. So I think of reality as being another word for natural law. Lewis in The Abolition of Man uses the Tao instead of the term natural law, but I think he's getting at the same idea. The idea that God impressed who he is, his moral law, into the fabric of the universe. And that if you live in accord with that law, you don't lie, you don't steal things, life is generally going to go better than if you kind of cut against the grain and do not live in accord with that law. I'm wishing now I'd listened to every one of your pods so I could hear all the previous answers. How did I do?
You did awesome. That's great. I love how you brought in Lewis and talked about natural law, because we've talked about that on the podcast before. And, I think that aligns, very closely to what we've heard before from other guests. If the truth is what God has put into our hearts and into our universe. And I think that might be part of the reason you started the CLT, maybe because some of those other college entrance exams stopped caring about the truth. So tell us a little bit about those circumstances.
Yeah, Robbie, and thanks so much for the opportunity. At CLT, we love classical conversations. We met the first time in probably early 2016, just a few months after we launched. And at that point, CLT was just a concept, but you personally took a great interest in what we were doing. You've been an encourager for 7 years now. You've been a member of the CLT Board of Academic Advisors. So really grateful. CLT, I think without the help of CC, we certainly would not be where it is today. But, I always want to give this little preface or disclaimer that it may seem like at first, holy smokes, this is going to be the worst, pod with Rob Bortons ever, because we're talking about standardized testing. Who cares about standardized testing? That's so boring. The reality, though, is that standardized testing, it plays an enormously influential role in kind of mainstream K-12 education in America. The College Board, and if you don't know what the College Board is, I believe it is the most powerful company in American education. I wish that company was CC or CLT or some other company that really loved the true good.
We're trying.
Beautiful. That's right. But right now it's a College Board. We're talking about a $1.2 billion empire. They launched in the year 1900. And essentially the idea at the time was wanting to bring basically the Ivies together to come up with common admission standards. And in 1926, the College Board then formed the SAT. And to their credit, the SAT did some good work. I think it was a way to find, young people with incredible cognitive ability and maybe some unusual locations, instead of it just being kids coming from, Phillips Exeter and Andover, the elite boarding schools in New England. Suddenly they're finding kids in rural Mississippi or inner city Chicago that the tests allowed them to find. But over the years, the College Board became increasingly ideological. If you're listening to this podcast and you're, over 40 or so, I took the SAT in 1999. And at that point, there were analogies on the SAT, logic questions. The test kind of deferred to curricular diversity. It really wasn't pushing any ideology back then. It is completely a different test now. And in fact, the only things that have stayed the same about the SAT is that it's still in English and the name has stayed the same. That's it. No logic questions, no analogies. In 2016, it became a Common Core aligned public school achievement test. The founder, the grand architect of the Common Core standards, David Coleman, right after pushing Common Core through almost every state, the governors, he went to the College Board and right away he aligned the SAT to the Common Core standards. And that created a demand. The homeschool world, classical Christian schools said, what is going on? We didn't sign on to this. We don't want to take a college entrance exam that is a public school Common Core achievement test, which means it is going to be anti-fiction, anti-classics, and it's going to be pushing the weird Common Core math that nobody understands, even the people who wrote it.
Jeremy, that's fascinating how the SAT has changed. I took it a year after you did, and I did okay. But I always tell parents this, like maybe your public school or your, educational background, you turned out okay. But things have changed. Things are very different. So, like, why did you call it anti-fiction, anti-math, anti-classical?
Yeah, and it's so much even more beyond that at this point, Rob. The SAT test, I tell people this and they're like, what are you talking about? This is a fact. And in 2020, the College Board thinks they are so beyond reproach that they can get away with anything. They had a Bernie Sanders op-ed on the SAT 2 years ago, right? They're not putting a Rand Paul op-ed on the SAT. They're not, they are absolutely, and you see this especially in AP US, especially in AP Euro, minimizing the contributions of the church, minimizing the contributions of the West to world cultures, and instead pushing an ideological agenda where America is the big bad, imperialist, and it has gone. Everybody always knew, Rob, that the College Board was left of center, and nobody cared. Everybody understood it. That was fine, but they went full crazy ideological in the past 10, 15, 20 years. I think that's why there was a need for an alternative, and that's what we're trying to do here at CLT.
Yeah, no, I remember specifically taking the SAT. There was one question. I was like, this is the answer that I want to provide as a Christian and a classically educated student.
Yeah.
I'm like 99% sure this is the answer they want me to pick.
Sure.
And so I was intellectually dishonest, I suppose, and picked the answer that I thought that they wanted. So what is the classical learning test? It sounds like you're taking on the College Board and the ACT and SAT. So what is it and how is it different?
Yeah, absolutely. So the main difference, Rob, is going to be what we call source material, or the material that actually goes on the test. So 2/3 of all of the reading passages that go on the CLT are from the CLT author bank. And the CLT author bank, it looks pretty similar to the CC, I think, curriculum and the reading list and the kind of authors that CC wants now, I believe, 150,000 young people around the world reading, right? We have young people, they're reading Ben Franklin. They're reading C.S. Lewis, on the test. Flannery O'Connor, Tolkien, George MacDonald, going back all the way to St. Augustine, St. Thomas Aquinas. We have Aristotle. We have passages from Plato's Republic on the CLT. You're not going to see any of that on an SAT or ACT. And, we've always been very careful to say, look, nobody thinks that a classically educated young person is going to do bad on the new, super progressive SAT. They're going to do fine. They're going to do fine on anything. But the question is this, is that if the most important test, and this, I believe, Rob, is one of the few concepts that almost everyone in education agrees with, that to some degree, tests end up driving curriculum, right? And that if the most important test is going to be pushing these narratives about, overpopulation and, every, woman ever, being miserable until the 1960s, this kind of narrative. Um, why should they get to kind of be the standard bearer and kind of setting the standard for what everybody else is doing? Academically, it is a classical renewal movement that is setting a new gold standard for academic excellence. And therefore, we should be the one, I think, to create the new college entrance exam. And that's what we want to do at CLT. We don't want to be self-appointed experts. We want to be looking at CC. We want to be looking at the big players in this movement and have a test that reflects what you care about, your rating lists.
Yeah, I've loved how you have reached out to the community. You've said, hey, I know how to put together tests and get them approved. And you guys have worked so hard to get them into colleges. I mean, hundreds of colleges now accept the CLT. And quite frankly, if your college that you're applying for doesn't accept the CLT, you might want to rethink your choices at this point, because you guys have done that hard work to get people aligned with this idea.
I love that you say that. And I've heard, Rob, some parents kind of say, we use the CLT list as a way to kind of start the college search process. And there's some truth to that. I mean, if there's a college that's just so crazy ideological that they just hate the entire Western intellectual tradition, well, they're certainly not going to talk to CLT. And that can be a pretty good indicator.
Yeah, and I mean, for those who wonder, you guys have normed your test versus the SAT and ACT, where you can look and say, okay, if this score on the CLT is the same as this score on the ACT, same as this kind of score on the SAT. So colleges, if they're looking for a certain kind of student, or that this is just as academically, probably more. I mean, you and I know it's more academically strenuous. It will show more success at the college level.
Sure. Yeah. And colleges, just by virtue of taking the CLT, colleges are, the secret's out, Rob. The secret is out. Kids coming out of CC, kids graduating from these classical Christian schools, the students that are receiving this kind of not just academic, but moral formation, those are the leaders on college campuses right now. I mean, these are some of the most involved students in every area of campus life. They lead the class discussions. Sometimes they're light years ahead of some of their peers, and the secret's out. And so what's happening, Rob, is that professors are going back to admissions and saying, where are we getting these homeschool kids? How do we get more of them? Yeah. Right.
I love how you talked about the test, drive the curriculum, because a lot of times, especially even in private schools, they tout the SAT scores and ACT scores, or they tout the colleges. So it's a whole ecosystem that's self-affirming, but it's self-affirming in a way that is really degrading to humanity, in my opinion.
Yeah.
And that you guys have filled in that gap and said, no, it doesn't have to be this way. We're going to create something that pursues truth, beauty, and goodness in a really kind of a college entrance exam.
Yeah, I love that, and I appreciate the kind words. It's interesting if you go back, and there's an 1869 version of the Harvard entrance exam that you can access even just on like Google Images. And in many ways, this has always been the case that entrance exams to colleges, they both reflect and they drive kind of the mainstream academic focus, of that time. And right now, we're on, I think, kind of the precipice of the classical movement really going mainstream. I mean, you were on the Pete Hegseth show the other day. I saw on Fox News, and kind of this movement has been quiet for decades, and now everybody knows about it now. The secret is out, and people are pouring into classical conversations. They're pouring into these classical Christian schools and classical charter schools. And on the college side, it's places like Hillsdale, Grove City, that are blowing up. And it's a lot of the ones that have become ideologically fanatical that are actually closing, and they're losing students at this point.
Talking about test driving the curriculum, one of the things that we struggle with sometimes as homeschoolers is, about 20 states or so require us to take end of grade testing annually or maybe every other year. And we're kind of required to take, in many of these tests that don't really maybe align with our values. Is CLT going to help us fix that issue?
My understanding right now, we're already approved in about 20 states already. And in North Carolina being one of them, we got CLT 10. approval. So we've got three main assessments: the CLT, which is college entrance, 11th and 12th grade; the CLT 10, 9th and 10th grade; and the CLT 8 for 7th and 8th grade. And then this spring we are piloting and norm referencing CLT 3, 4, 5, and 6 as well. And what's been really amazing, we have not spent a penny, Rob, not a penny, on lobbyists at this point. I mean, this is basically what the College Board does. The free market sped out the College Board 20 years ago. And so what do they do instead? They wine and dine politicians at the local, state level to pass legislation that then forces kids to take their test as a graduation requirement, or end of 10th grade test or something like that. But what's happened organically? This just happened in Kentucky. We got approved as an acceptable test in Kentucky, and it was because parents and even students on their own accord reached out to their local representatives, and they said, add CLT. We don't want to go out there and take this, ideological, super progressive nonsense test that doesn't reflect what we've been doing. We want CLT instead. And people at the local legislative level have been very quick to respond.
That's great. What can we expect from the CLT 3, 4, 5, and 6? Hopefully will be coming out soon.
Rob, I get so excited talking about it. It's beautiful. I mean, we've got students reading, passages from Grimm's fairy tales, from George MacDonald. It's incredible what we're putting in poetry, putting in front of these students. And the timing of this is kind of wild. So NWEA Maps, and this is, one of the very largest lower grade testing companies in the United States. More than 2,000 Catholic elementary schools use NWEA Maps. A number of even classical charters use them. And they got caught essentially about 2 months ago on their own website. They were recommending for kindergarteners, read aloud. The hips on the drag queen go swish, swish, swish.
What?
Yeah, for kindergartners, read aloud, right? And I've talked to center-left Democrats about this, and they've said, this is insane. Who supports this kind of thing? This isn't even a conservative thing anymore. It's just a common sense thing that it's only a tiny, radical fringe group that thinks we should be introducing 5-year-olds to transgender ideology, right? And this is what the mainstream standardized testing, industry is basically done. They've all gone very, very hard ideologically in a very progressive direction. And CLT is saying, hey, can we just do what every generation before us did and put students in front of great fairy tales and great stories?
That's wonderful. I think we need just an aside, I think we need to stop calling them progressive ideology and call it regressive ideology.
Love it.
Because this is a big step backwards for humanity.
Yeah.
When these ideas are pushed, especially on young children who are innocent, don't know any better. And that's probably why they're starting there instead of people who maybe have
they
some
use
common
testing
sense.
as a way to normalize it because it's so subtle, right? And so a student's taking a test and it might just be a question about, the number of trans versus cisgender or something. This is where we're at, Rob. I mean, it sounds wild, but and essentially, I mean, if you put yourself in the shoes of these test development companies, they'll maybe have a test developer or a test content writer comes up with these. And then the person who has to approve it, if they push back, they're called a transphobe, and everybody's terrified of that. And so it ends up getting through and in front of thousands and thousands of students.
It's a sad state that we see ourselves in. But there's hope. There's the CLT. Now, I know like when I was going to college, like if you got certain SAT scores or stuff, you could get merit-based scholarships, or the colleges would let you into honors college. Is that something that you're seeing with the CLT students? Are there scholarships available? Different things like that?
Sure. Yeah. More than 200 partner colleges, right now, we work, especially in terms of the scholarships, we're tied to scholarships at Grove City, Hillsdale, places like Anderson in South Carolina, Palm Beach Atlantic University, Belmont Abbey there in North Carolina as well. And so if a college is tying test scores to scholarships, and a smaller, especially Christian college, at this point, it's almost certain that they've tied scholarship dollars to CLT as well.
Can you tell us some of the testimonies that you've heard from students? Because I've heard some of them in our board meetings, and they're just beautiful. Because you wouldn't think that a student would take a kind of a college entrance exam or the 10 or the 8 and come away with testimonies like you've shared before.
Sometimes those are rare. It's often not the case. My daughter took the CLT 8 in her class, and I said, how did it go? And she said, well, I don't think the students gave it the best review. I said, what do you mean? I'm your dad. And she said, well, it was still a test, And so I get that a lot of students, they don't necessarily love a test, but we have heard those stories where a student will finish and they'll say, Mom, who is G.K. Chesterton? I read this passage I want another C.S. Lewis book. Can we do the Space Trilogy? So we do, but I think that also happens on the test prep side. So we want to be able to redeem all of that time, reading a lot of these nonsense passages. The prep is still going to happen, but when they do CLT prep, again, they're reading. It's not a detour from their CC education. It's not a distraction. Instead, it should be there to affirm and to help them to even continue to go deeper and deeper in it as well. And also, Rob, I would say, as crucial as we think testing is, a teacher, especially a parent, the hard work of changing hearts, of cultivating virtue in the lives of young people, cultivating a love for what is true, good, and beautiful. We want to be supporting everyone doing that work, and we're not under an illusion that a test will necessarily do that. We hope it could sometimes, but we believe it's an important part of kind of the whole ecosystem.
Yeah, no, 100%. I mean, at Classical Conversations, we don't have a lot of testing incorporated into our curriculum. We kind of look at a number of assessments, but of course, we support the CLT test. So tell us a little bit about how do you view testing versus assessment? Because I know you have obviously kids that are in school, and testing is a little bit different than maybe what you would assess a student. So can you break that down for our listeners?
Sure. Yeah. So the CLT tests are not what you would consider content knowledge tests, right? And so what we're doing with the CLT is we're testing essentially reading comprehension skills, quantitative reasoning skills, and where a student is at in terms of grammar writing. And I think it's really important to emphasize here, Rob, that you can really, really overemphasize the importance of a test, and I think do damage, to young people in that process. I mean, my generation, it was almost like your SAT score, was like branded on your forehead. It was like, you're going to be a 930 for life or whatever it may be. But then sometimes we've gone to the other extreme now. A lot of universities have it doesn't matter at all. A test score, a college entrance exam score, it's a snapshot. It shows where a student is at in some really key areas academically in a given moment in time, but it's not any more than that either. And so it's a helpful tool, but sometimes it can create undue stress to overemphasize the importance of the score. And CLT, as of right now, we don't do what are called content knowledge assessments. And so there's not a CLT. Does CLT test your knowledge of classical antiquity? No. You're going to read a Dante passage that tests your reading comprehension. And with that, because it's Dante or maybe Frederick Douglass, it is testing your fluency with the tradition. A student who is, has gone through Classical Conversations, they're going to be far more picking up a Dante passage or a Thomas Aquinas passage or a C.S. Lewis passage than a student going through a typical public school K-12 kind of a curriculum. But really, it's just that kind of a fluency and a comfort with these kinds of texts, I think, that give a classically educated student an advantage on the CLT, over the SAT or ACT.
That's great. Now, you choose classical education for your own children. How did you come about that?
It'd be very awkward if I did not.
Right.
I only do this.
I homeschool because my mom makes me.
I only do this as a job. On a personal level, I love the secular progressive stuff. We do. We have 6 kiddos. The oldest 2 are in Catholic schools. I call them kind of semi-classical. The next one is in a very classical new Catholic school that is we've been very happy with. The next one is pure homeschool. The next 2 are pure homeschool, and then the others, he's in diapers learning how to say mommy and daddy.
So he's
but
being homeschooled too.
yeah,
Half of them homeschooled.
yeah. But Rob, my story, I was public school educated, K-12. I went to Louisiana State University. I know you went to Clemson.
Yeah, you beat us last time, I think.
Yeah. But I discovered this tradition in seminary. I taught for 3 years in inner city New York after graduating college. And I felt like even during that time that we were not able to meet the kids we were working with. They were living in a spiritual wasteland in a lot of ways. They were living in, their world was full of suffering, and we had no way to speak into it. And so really when I taught for 3 years in New York City, and then I went to seminary after that, and it was in seminary that it hit me like a ton of bricks. Like, wow, every generation almost before us, what they were going after, what they were trying to do in this big crazy thing we call education was fundamentally different. What they were going after was moral formation, the cultivation of virtue, the cultivations of the affections, to love what the student ought to love and hate what they ought to hate. I thought, wow, this is in no way what I've ever been exposed to. When did we make this kind of radical detour? And I think this is, for your listeners, that seems like the story for most. You're different. You grew up in this, Rob, but there's not many that did. Most people I talk to say, I discovered it 3 years ago. I discovered it 10 years ago. I discovered this last week. This is amazing,
Yeah, it's beautiful. Hey, whenever you get to classical education, that's when the Lord had that plan for you. And yeah, it's great to see the classical renewal here in the United States. One of the ways that that's happening is through your podcast, Anchored. And tell us about that. Tell us our audience why they should listen and how to listen.
Yes. Well, Anchor podcast, we try to drop a couple a week. Typically, we feature college presidents on the Anchor podcast, or thought leaders or kind of leaders in the movement, including your own Rob Borton's here as well. But yeah, a good mix across the kind of the ecumenical spectrum, Catholic, Orthodox, a lot of Reformed, Protestant people as well. But I think one of the things that makes it unique is we're really trying to hit on kind of the intersection of education and culture. Rob, unlike your podcast, we never talk cryptocurrency, but I think it's awesome that you do. So I'm happy to talk crypto if we get a chance to do that as well. But yeah, please do. If you're a big podcaster, typically 30, 40 minutes, we drop new ones every Tuesday and Thursday.
So have you invested in crypto?
Okay, my crypto story, Rob, I bought so early. I bought 3.18 Bitcoins, and I bought them for $67. And I believe it was 2011. And I had to wire money back then to do it. It was wild.
Sure, it's crazy.
Yeah. And they went up, and it went up to $1,000, and I thought I was rich, but then it tanked. And I'm like, oh, this thing is a joke. And I, I'm a teacher. We don't have a whole lot of money. And we wanted to get a rug, and Overstock.com started taking Bitcoin. And I spent all of the Bitcoin I had on a rug at Overstock.com. Within a few years, my kids did what kids did to the rug. They spilled their grape juice on it, and the rug has now been trashed. And I have, and I have no Bitcoin. So that is my sad crypto story.
Well, we all have sad crypto stories. But yeah, your 3.18 rug. So at one point, in the last couple of years, you had a $150,000 rug.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Yeah.
I know. Telling your wife you got to work another day.
Yeah, that's right.
Oh, man. Well, tell us, you alluded to your teaching experience and how that kind of, it sounded a little bit hopeless. My wife taught in public schools for nearly a decade and kind of had a similar experience. Loved the children, but just a lot of times tears and just brokenheartedness. So tell us a little bit about those background and, how did you try to reach those kids who might not have, had that support structure around them?
Yeah. And, Rob, I did meet some great families, some great teachers, some great students as well during that time. But I increasingly became more and more kind of disillusioned with the entire experiment. And it's really what it is. It's an experiment. that at this point is not going very well. And I really, the grand perspective, humans have been doing education since at least, Deuteronomy in the Old Testament, and writing, God's law above your door frame. And what I found, Rob, was that it's just it's interesting to me. I was reading Narnia 4 or 5 years ago to my kids, and I never picked up on this, but Lewis names the school that Eustace, Scrub, and Jill go to. Remember what he names it?
No, I don't remember.
He names their school Experiment House.
Oh, yeah.
And it was a commentary, he was reinforcing what, abolition of man and that hideous strength. It was a commentary on education. And this was my experience. Every year we'd go, it was a joke among teachers. I was like, what is going to be the new silver bullet to make education good, And it's like, oh, this year it's thinking maps, or this year it's the new, 8.0 smart board. It was some kind of a new product. Instead of saying, we've really messed this up, we should go back to tradition, what was done for millennia, to shape and to form, the hearts and souls and minds of young people, and build on that instead. I will say this, just as a quick story, my very last year teaching before I left the public school arena, I was teaching evening high school, and these kids had got kicked out of day school. I remember kids sometimes would show up and they'd say, "Yo, Mr. Tate, you know what I did all day today?" I'd say, "I don't know if I want to know." They'd say, I smoked pot for 4 hours today. And I'm like, oh my goodness, why are you telling me this? But they were in drug trouble and kicked out of school. And I was supposed to teach them the same English textbook with the same fragmented passages. And I said, you know what? I said, I might get in some trouble for this, but this semester for evening high school, we're going to chuck the textbook and we're not going to do any tests, and you're not going to get graded on anything, and you're not going to have any papers. We're going to sit in a circle and we're going to read Flannery O'Connor's short stories together. And if you're dialed in and you're engaged, you're going to get an A in the class. And if you're checked out, you're not. It was the very best semester I'd ever had teaching, And at this point, I didn't know anything about classical. I'm just feeling my way through the dark, but it was incredible. Yeah. I'll never forget this one student, this scene from Good Country People where, this con, steals this girl's prosthetic leg. And it's this very, Flannery O'Connor, maybe more than any modern author. I mean, she just uncovers the evil of evil, right? She wakes people up to spiritual reality by showing how evil is. And this kid, I remember him, he's like out of his seat saying, "This is insane. I can't believe he just stole her fake leg. Like, that is the most wicked thing I've ever heard of in my life." Students, they're hungry to talk about transcendental ideas. They're hungry to talk about the nature of evil, good. What is the good life? What is human happiness? How do we find it? And they're not getting any of this in mainstream American education right now. And that's why I'm so grateful, Rob, for the work at Classical Conversations, this whole renewal movement. Hopefully, in 20 years, there's very few kids that are getting, this kind of meaningless education that is so detached from the things they're made to learn and to know.
Yeah, just to close out, can you tell us, where do you see, you're probably more in touch with the whole classical movement than maybe anyone else, since, obviously I talked to the ACCS schools, I talked to some of the other groups, so, but you're in the trenches, helping to support all these different organizations. How do you see classical education growing over the next 5 years?
Yeah, it's incredible. You really can't find a classical charter school right now where the wait list is not as big as the whole school. We've gone from 13,000 homeschoolers in 1973 to well over 5 million in 2022. Of course, CC is leading the way with, 150,000 students or how many, and in many countries, it's not just in the U.S. now. I know CC is in Russia and South America. You're in Brazil. You're all over the place. So I do think, since I got into this arena in 2015, people have been talking about, this tipping point concept. Is that a Malcolm Gladwell concept?
I think so.
Yeah, and is that how it's going to be? And essentially the tipping point concept is that, things will grow very, very, very slowly, and then they grow very rapidly all at once, as essentially you basically penetrate a mass market. I think that's happening. When I started CLT, I would, try to explain to people what I'm doing, and there was like, I don't get it. Like, what do you mean a classical school, or what is that? And now almost everyone has some kind of a reference point, They say, oh, my sister, her kids are doing classical conversations, or oh, my niece is in a classical charter school down in Florida. Most people have some kind of a connection to this movement. There's a national awareness now, which makes it very new. And I think we're going to continue. My hope, Rob, in 5 or 10 years, the choice is not, public school or private, or even, homeschool or private, that the choice is classical or secular progressive, as really the two options, and so it's exciting times. We're living through an incredible disruption of American education, and I think it's for the better.
Well, I agree with you there. Jeremy, thanks so much for coming on the show today. I know our listeners are going to want to learn more about you and your work. So, what's the website, and what are some social media platforms they can connect with you on?
Sure. Yeah, our website is cltexam.com. Again, cltexam.com. Please do. You can register for a CLT, CLT 10, or CLT 8, all coming up usually at least every month. You can follow me on Twitter. It's really the only platform I use right now. It's at Jeremy Tate 41.
I hope to be as big as you on Twitter one day. So tag me every once in a while, bro.
Yes. Yeah. I'm really grateful for your work, grateful for the work at Classical Conversations. You're a leader, and you have been in this movement for a long time, and it's fun causing trouble together,
Oh, yeah. Yeah, whenever everyone asks me, are you staying out of trouble? I said, just running right into it, man. Running right into it. Well, we're super pumped. We've been, supporting CLT from the beginning. We're super pumped about CLT 3, 4, 5, and 6 that are going to be coming out the next couple years to really help get all of our students, if they have to take end-of-grade testing, out of those secular progressive end-of-grade tests and into something that is aligned with truth, beauty, and goodness. Be sure to check out those websites, and we'll see you next time, Jeremy.
Rob, thanks so much.
Now let's practice the 15 tools of learning together. Tucker Carlson is out at Fox News, and they let us know they're expressing themselves through a press release that basically said that Fox News and Tucker Carlson came to an agreement for him to leave the network. Rumors are that he was told about 10 minutes before they released the press release. So we'll see how much it costs them to do that. Relationship, discover cause and effect. Some people have been speculating that this was the cause of the Dominion lawsuit, where Fox News paid almost $800 million to them for spreading quote unquote lies about, their services. And Tucker Carlson, not exactly someone who a lot of the Fox News ownership liked. I saw him speak 4 or 5 years ago, a couple years before the pandemic. And at that point, he speculated that he wasn't going to be at Fox News much longer. Honestly, before hearing him speak in person in a private meeting, I was not a Tucker Carlson fan. But after hearing his true opinions behind closed doors, I started to appreciate his positions more, and then he started to speak out more. So it wasn't surprising to me that they eventually fired him, and I don't think it was surprising to him. And delivery, of course, they mentioned something on Monday, even though they fired him Friday. On his last episode, he said, "See you on Monday." He did not know that he wasn't going to be there. So very interesting. They have someone else filling in for him now. I'm sure Tucker Carlson will be letting us know his plans soon enough. But this is a great way of practicing the 15 tools of learning with current events. Hey everyone, I want to interrupt this conversation to tell you a little bit about our all-new resource from Classical Conversations, Scribblers at Home, Recipes from Lifelong Learners, an at-home curriculum for homeschool families with children ages 4 to 8. with step-by-step activities and easy-to-follow charts that will help you cultivate a love of learning in your child through intentional everyday play. Find magic in the mundane as your kitchen becomes a classroom, your backyard becomes a laboratory, and your child develops simple learning rhythms that will carry them through life. You can use Scribblers at Home to complement the Foundations program or on its own. Either way, this new curriculum will help homeschool parents of little learners create a family environment where they develop habits like playing, praying, and reading, and those come naturally. You can find out more at scribblersathome.com. Now let's get back to the show. Now let's jump in to talk about crypto. You may have heard that the federal government has started selling their Bitcoin. So let's practice the 15 tools of learning with storytelling. Back in the day, there was a website called Silk Road. It was run by Ross Ulbricht. He is now in prison for the rest of his life. Silk Road was a way for people to sell things on the black market, which is why Bitcoin has a history or a idea behind it that is a way to sell stuff and buy stuff on the black market, because it literally was used for that originally. And so part of that illegalness of Silk Road was the government actually seized Ross's Bitcoin when they arrested him and put him in prison. Another person, James Song, I think I'm pronouncing his name right, actually robbed Silk Road website of 50,000 Bitcoin. At the time, Bitcoin was worth about $12, so a little bit over $600,000 at that time. Right now, it's trading around $28,000 as of this recording. It could be higher or lower, depending on when you're listening. But the federal government also got his Bitcoin. And so throughout history, they've started to sell. So the relationship, the 5 common topics of dialectic tool, is that relationship between Silk Road and that stolen Bitcoin, and now the Bitcoin that the federal government has. So in the 5 canons of rhetoric, we talk about delivery, the practicing and presenting the best thoughts. So how is this going to be sold? And it's going to be sold on Coinbase. Coinbase is a publicly traded company. And on Coinbase, there's 2 ways to sell. One, if you're buy. If you're a consumer, possibly like yourself or myself, you go on there and create an account, and you can put an order in to buy Bitcoin. And that's called just trading. It goes on the block, and that kind of what you see the fluctuation of those prices are. So if the prices go up, it's because more people are buying. If it goes down, less people are buying. OTC stands for over the counter. So the federal government is most likely selling it over the counter. So if you want to get rid of a bunch of Bitcoin at once, you can see that if the market was suddenly flooded with Bitcoin, that would significantly drive down the price as well. So the seller would not get as much value out of it. So OTC means they're looking for specific sellers that have a direct kind of one-to-one purchasing of that. So a lot of times you get it maybe at a discount, and they don't want that to reflect in the trading price, or maybe an individual doesn't want it to go onto the Coinbase. So that's how the federal government is getting rid of a lot of their Bitcoin right now. Prices seem to remain stable at this moment, but of course with crypto, that could change at any time. And next time I talk about crypto, we're going to talk about the SEC and what they're doing right now that could be causing some confusion to people in the crypto space. Until next time, keep educating yourself about these alternative systems to fiscal policy. Thank you for joining me on today's podcast. Next week, we'll have Dale Partridge on. Be sure to follow us on YouTube. I'd love for you to connect with me on Instagram, Twitter, or Facebook, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you for listening to Refining Rhetoric with Robert Bortons. Want more? Make sure to subscribe so you won't miss an episode. You can also follow us on social media to continue the conversation, and visit classicalconversations.com/rhetoric to find out how you can join a local homeschool community.